This is take two. I had to take care of a belligerent rooster and remind him that he can end up in the stew pot. We ate his brother. Anyway, you hear him over there? Anyway, this is Granny Fisher, and welcome to my channel. If you want to hear more about how to prepare for the next Great Depression, be sure to click the subscribe button, and when the little bell comes up, click that and click on all, and you'll be notified whenever a new video goes up. These are usually posted on Monday afternoon. Just checking on that bird. He's still complaining. But anyway, today we're going to talk about how to get by financially in a Great Depression. And I have a couple of examples from people I've talked to that went through the Great Depression. The first one. About 30 years ago, I was going to a church, and an old black man came to speak at our church, and he was talking about what it was like in the Great Depression. And he said, we didn't know there was any depression. He said, we just kept on plowing behind the same old mule. And that gives you an example of how a lot of people got through the first Great Depression. They didn't live extravagantly to begin with. They didn't rely on money a lot to begin with. They were mostly just growing their own food, making their own clothes, and staying home, you know. So that kind of a lifestyle, a subsistence type lifestyle, is not as impacted as somebody who is more active out in the world, in the financial world, in investments and business and that sort of thing. Another man that I talked to who had gone through the Great Depression said that right toward the end of the Depression, the federal government was starting projects, building projects. And one that they were undertaking in Alabama was to prepare the nation for World War II. And it was a military base, and a lot of people came into the area and were working on construction of that military base. Well, this particular man, who now, if he's still alive, he has a car dealership down there now, so he prospered. But back in the 1920s and 30s, he got a job on the construction project, building this military base. And then when he got through in the afternoons, he would drive to his father's farm, which was just outside of town, load up on fresh produce, eggs, milk, and all that kind of stuff, and drive back to the camp where all the construction workers were housed, and he would drive through the camp and sell the produce, sell the milk, sell the eggs, and that's how he actually made a lot of money. My mother went through the Great Depression. She was born in 1915, so when the stock market collapsed in 1929, she would have been about 14 years old. And I had to do the math real quick, but she was about 14 years old. Well, she and her father and mother and two younger siblings were living in Florida, and her father had been working on construction jobs. He was a carpenter. And so when the economy collapsed and the work dried up and he was no longer employed anywhere, he fled to North Georgia where his father's farm was. And he and his wife were both from North Georgia, from up in the mountains. And his father had a 100-acre farm on Star Creek. And they went up there, and he found a place to rent nearby, and called the Clark Place, and they stayed on that place. He went looking for work. He went out to Oklahoma and found a job and was there for a while, and his family stayed there in North Georgia. Well, then he injured his back and had to come home and wasn't able to work. And so my mother, who was junior in high school, she and her younger brother put in a corn crop. They plowed with a mule, they plowed, they planted, they hoed, and they harvested the corn. which they relied on a great deal because she told me one time they would have cornmeal mush for breakfast. For lunch, they would have vegetables from the garden. And for dinner, they would have cornbread and milk. So they used a lot of corn for their own food, and they also fed their chickens corn. And so corn was used for a lot of things. And they would usually get it ground on halves. They would take it to the mill, and the miller would grind it up, and he would keep half of it as his pay for grinding the corn. So there was no cash involved in that. They also had milk and eggs that they would take to the little local grocery store and sell or trade for items that they needed at their home. There's some things that they just couldn't, grow. They didn't have wheat for flour, so they, if they wanted flour, they had to buy flour. If they wanted coffee, they had to buy coffee. There were things like that. And so she and her brother stayed out of school one whole year because they didn't have the money to buy their books, which back then they had to buy their books, and they had to put in that corn crop, and they were really proud that they got a corn crop in. And she wasn't going to go back to school, so a friend of hers who thought it was very important that she go back to school bought her books for her and encouraged her to go back to school, and she ended up graduating at the top of her class. So that's how my mother made do during the Great Depression as a teenager. And her family lived off that farm. They grew almost everything that they ate. Now, there are certain things that you can do to make money on a homestead, or even just even if you don't have any land, there are certain things you can do to make some money. Right now, with the economy in dire straits as it is, a lot of people out of work, a lot of businesses having to close down, a lot of bankruptcies. There are two businesses in my little town that I personally know about that are booked solid. They are booked up for the foreseeable future. One is the meat processing place, because a lot of people are taking their cattle to be butchered, and they're not even doing deer this year, even though it's deer hunting season. We're just starting into bow season, which comes before gun season. And normally they would be butchering a lot of deer for the hunters, but right now they've got all the beef they can butcher, and they're booked up for 2 years. So if you had a steer that you wanted to put in the freezer, let's say you go to a farmer and you buy a steer so much a pound, he's going to deliver it to the butcher. Well, that butcher is telling you you've got to make an appointment for 2 years from now. That's how long they're booked up. And the other business I know of that stays booked up is a friend of mine that has an alteration shop. She has a little sewing shop. She hems pants, she makes bridesmaid dresses, she makes pillows and teddy bears, anything somebody needs done, and she charges so much an hour. And she is booked up for 3 weeks. You have to make an appointment and bring your pants or shirt or whatever it is back to her in 3 weeks when that appointment is set, to get her to stitch up your clothes or sew whatever item you want sewed. So she's got a booming business, and she's only open 3 days a week, and she makes $30 an hour, and so that's pretty good money for having your own little shop. So these are a couple of businesses that I know that are very, very busy right now, and probably in a Great Depression they would also still have lots of business. So start thinking of things that people will need done. I know in Cuba, because they could not import new cars, car mechanics became incredibly valuable. They could repair the old cars and keep them running when you couldn't afford to buy a new one. So start thinking of things that people will need fixed or repaired. If you have skills in a certain area, if you just know how to dig ditches really well, your skills might be required by some other people who, let's say they need somebody to dig a water line or a place to put a pole in for a solar panel or anything like that. Think about the skills that you have and how you can use them to make money. Now we, here on our little homestead, we sell eggs. We have a pretty steady business with eggs, even though we charge more than they do in the grocery stores. Ours are free-range eggs. They're fresh eggs straight from the farm, and people can see the chickens walking around. They know they're fresh. We sold some chickens. Some Mexicans came and bought some chickens that they wanted to put in the freezer, some little roosters that we didn't need that many roosters. We've sold milk because people will buy goat milk. Now in our area, you can't really sell it for human consumption without your place being inspected by the state, but you can sell it for pet food. You can sell it for, a lot of people make soap with goat milk in it, and you get a good price for it too, by the way. I think we were getting about $7 a gallon for goat milk, fresh goat milk. And so that's a couple of things that we have produced on the place that we can sell. My husband's good at repairing radios and building amps and stuff like that. Another family member is a blacksmith and just does it for fun, but think how valuable that would be if all of a sudden everything really went hell in a handbasket and there was no way to buy tools. How many shortages have we already seen at the store? What if you need a tool, you need a screwdriver, you need a pry bar, maybe you need a knife, a good sharp knife. If you can't buy those at the store, who's going to make those for you? You need someone who's experienced at blacksmithing, who can actually make them on a forge at a hot fire. And that's what this one does. This member of our family does. A car repair is another one, if you know how to repair cars and keep them running. Any kind of skill that you have that would be in demand in a grid down situation or a very difficult economic situation like a Great Depression, you need to think in those terms. And I recommend getting started now selling your skills, selling your products, just on a small scale, because if you get in a position where the currency is no longer of value or becomes hard to come by, people will remember that they bought this, whatever it is, from you. And they'll come back and barter, trade with you. Hey, I've got a can of gasoline. Can I trade this for whatever? So start thinking now about what your skills are, what your products might be. If you like to bake, maybe you could make bread, make cookies. There are people that go from door to door downtown and sell sweet rolls and cookies to the people in the offices, especially on Friday afternoon when everybody's got their paycheck. So start looking at what you can do to produce income for yourself and your family, and especially any kind of skills or products that would be easily bartered, that would be good barter material. Because what you want for barter material in a grid down situation is the items that are renewable. So things that are produced in your soil and reproduce, things that are produced by your animals and they can reproduce, or skills that you slowly improve over the course of time and you become really good at, that you can sell those skills. Those are the things that you want to be able to rely on in a Great Depression, not a stockpile of toilet paper that'll run out. You want something that's renewable. So start thinking along those lines. Think outside the box. Start looking at what will people need and what can I provide. And start doing it now. Build up your market base, build up your customer base, and build up your skills. This is Granny Fisher. I'll see you next time.